this on? All right, there we go. Hi, I'm Jen Mellon, and I am here talking about luck is made, how repeat founders minimize failure. So basically how not to do the same things I did. So a little bit about me and why I'm qualified to give such a talk today. So first off, I have 5 kids. I start with that because they're like 5 mini startups. I fail all the time there and learn a lot. I'm also the founder and president of Trustify, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I had 2 previous startups. Both of them were bootstrapped and profitable. And prior to that, I had 10 years in the child welfare field. So I originally moved to DC, which Trustify is based now, 14 years ago to work for Congress, drafting policy legislation for some of the world's most vulnerable populations of children, and then was recruited prior to Facebook. Thank goodness there was no social media at the time. I was the 24-year-old executive director of the world's largest and oldest child welfare association. So my first board meeting was quite interesting when they showed up and realized they hired a child. But it taught me a lot. And nonprofit, for those of you who have ever been involved, is very much like running a startup as well. And so moving along, a little bit about Trustify and where I'm at right now. So once upon a time in 2014, it was the last time I was here at Startupfest, and me and my co-founder, who eventually became my husband, we were dating at the time, where he was going off of an exit at the time. His company, Speak, was getting acquired successfully. It was a good exit. He had another previous exit, and we were dreaming about what was next. So I'm sure you feel after today just inspired and just learning from these incredible entrepreneurs and experts that have taken the stage. And we were in the same place, and we're excited to test some of our ideas. So at the time, we had an hypothesis. And we had a list of ideas that we tested, and I'll get a little bit more into that as the talk goes on. But our hypothesis was that trust and honesty were at their lowest points in decades. He was the entrepreneur in residence. Shortly after leaving Startupfest that summer, he became the entrepreneur in residence at HHS under the Obama administration, dealing with senior care fraud. We had needed to use a PI for a custody reason, and it was a terrible experience, and just kind of thought to ourselves, like, why would anyone ever have to use a PI? And I hope we never have to again. And then we actually looked at the research. According to data, there's actually studies on this, on trust, that trust peaked in the 60s and has declined ever since. There's a good Washington Post article that the AP also had about this. And so we also saw that businesses across the board, doesn't matter what vertical you're in, lose 5% of their revenue every year to fraud, which is fascinating in general. So it's something that everyone deals with. It's a pain point that we just kind of throw our hands up in the air and say, like, oh, well, it's just the nature of the beast in doing business. And then after this election, there were such thing as alternative facts, which we never foresaw when we launched Trustify in 2015. And so Trustify is the first technology platform to connect clients and businesses across the globe to the only global network of licensed and highly vetted private investigators, both doing real-world surveillance, boots on the ground, and digital forensic work. And so hence you can get my film noir background. We are a new trust and safety layer in your deck stack, both for business and consumer. And we saw that it was an enormous and fragmented market. And I'll talk more about that and how we discovered these things. But we bought every IBIS report after doing our own testing, and we saw all the words that entrepreneurs love, right? No clear industry leader, a large pool of underutilized, highly skilled assets looking for work and not getting enough of it. And it was ripe for a land grab. And so right now we're redefining and expanding this market. It's a $50 billion market that we're playing in that really no one's a clear leader in. And 80% of our customers in our 2.5 years that we've looked at have never used a PI before. And that's both on the B2C and B2B side of the house. And we're solving this fundamental problem. So I often get, Jen, how the hell did you get into private investigators? And it's a question I'll talk more about. But people often think we're dealing with infidelity, right? We're catching cheating spouses. And it's probably the smallest percentage of our use cases. We found this ideal supply and demand scenario where there was this highly fragmented market, there was no clear winner in the space, and there was a need, there was a pain point that both businesses and consumers were seeing. And how we solved this was that customers were saving money and investigators were making more money. So there was no large retainer. Traditionally, you would have to actually walk to a detective agency, give them a large retainer like you did your attorney, so like $5,000 to $3,000. And the PIs were only getting paid in the US about $22 an hour. On average in Canada, it's $20.45. So we were paying the PIs more. And our consumers were paying by the hour. So it started at $99 an hour. It can go down to $79 an hour. And you're fully control the process. We even refund you the hours you don't use. And because of this and various other reasons I'll get into, we've been well funded by the who's list of investors. We've raised over $15 million from Chris Sacca, Barbara Corcoran. She personally invested, so did Brad Feld, along with a syndicate. Slow Ventures, 500 Startups, SoGal, Plum Alley, Sovereigns, Gelt, and Anchorage. And yet we were able to do this while staying true to our beliefs and values, and that was critical. When we sat in the seat you are sitting in now, we said that would have to be a critical component to any startup that we would found in the future. All right, so here's the reason why you're here, right? Lessons learned. And I really believe, and I think this is true, I've my whole life been told I'm a lucky person. I kind of win any of those stupid raffles that you fill out. But I also believe at the heart of it that luck is made. And it's when preparation meets opportunity. And that's exactly really the story of Trustify. And so we'll keep with this film noir theme. So Act 1. And start with this question. Like, do people want this? You know, we've heard a lot, at least even since being here, people talk, successful founders talk about believing in their product or their vision or their idea. And I'm sure you do too. But do people want your idea? And this is not just another lean startup deck, but do they really want what you have to offer? Danny and I had a long list of really great ideas. And a few of those, we just believed at our heart of hearts that this was a void that we were going to fill and that we would be extremely successful. Together, this is our 5th startup. All of ours have been profitable and they've been very different. And he had 2 previous successful exits. And the bottom of our list were private investigators on demand. That never in a billion years did we think we'd be doing that. But when we tested the data, and I love this quote, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." When we tested it, and what do I mean by testing it? We spent very little money. We did some quick MVPs on Facebook. So create some Facebook ads. In the beginning, we just had like who we are, what we were doing, and click here if you're interested. And so we had these conversion rates. And we just kept making it thicker and thicker. And so with some of the other ideas we had, they would be thick, but then it would start to trail off as we got further on the line. And really, for us, the best data is when they click buy now, pay this amount of money, and put a specific amount of money on there to buy. And when we had conversion rates for private investigators on demand, it was through the roof. And what we would do is on the next page, it would say, give us your email address. We're in beta. We'll be in touch when we're launching. But we had this awesome conversion rate for this, and we said we were onto something. And that's when we bought all the IBIS reports. Put your hands on every piece of market research you have out there and see what it's telling you. Because guess what? At the end of the day, a Facebook ad is not scientific data, right? It's giving you a really good idea of potentially solving your conclusion or hypothesis, but it's not scientific. So see what's out there. Whether in the United States, we have these really great market research reports by, the same in Canada, and get your arms around who else is in the space. Is it saturated? You know, we saw words we love, right, for a land grab, no leading winner, no technology. We're in this really antiquated, fragmented industry. It's been around for 200 years, and no one's playing in it. And we continue to be this way. We A/B test everything we do. So there are ideas that we have that I'm like, this is just this is a no-brainer, common sense, and we test it. And my team is incredible, because sometimes I come to them and I'm like, we just have to do this, and then I have to eat my own cooking because they're like, well, not until I test it, Jen. And I really believe that has led to our success and our scale. We hit this hockey stick of growth from day one, and it's truly based on making every decision on data and not just our own inner gut. And validate your riskiest assumptions, right? Like, do people want this? How much are they willing to pay for this? And in your heart of hearts, you may say, I'm an expert in this field. I've been working in this industry for 20 years, and I can do it better, faster, more efficient, and cheaper. But really validate, at the end of the day, will someone buy this, right? Will enough people buy this? Exactly. Do enough people want this? And that's part of the problem. How big is this market that you're going into? Maybe at the end of the day, lots of people want like flower delivery on demand, and there's some incredibly successful startups out there, but really, how big is the market? And that's the difference between startups and small businesses. Many of you have incredible ideas and incredible companies, but that's the difference. And finding out early on what your total addressable market is critical to your growth. And that's the difference. There's nothing wrong with an incredible brick and mortar small business, small to medium sized business. Most of them are name brands, right? We can name a lot of them right here. And maybe that's what you're going to be. But the difference with startups is your scale. How big is it? For us, it's this $50 billion market that no one else is playing in. What we saw initially, it was $5 billion, which was maybe not even big enough for us to kind of play in. But when we saw the rich data of that first year of who our consumers really were, but further, more than that 80% had never used a PI before, that we're already expanding this market. And you'll find that out very early on. I believe it will take you a quarter to kind of find that traction and maybe have to make some pivots to see what works best. So act 2, is this illegal? And this is probably not a slide you're going to see in a lot of startup decks, but it's true, and this is the world we're living in now, right? We've learned a lot. I think in the past, regulators left us alone. They were like, I don't understand startups. That's not my background. Until you do something egregious or you're bringing in a few $1 billion in revenue, you're just not on my radar. And no longer can that be the case. And I believe that it's strategic in your foundational stage to understand the regulations around your industry. You know, Uber and Airbnb has taught us a lot about that. Uber said, we're going to create taxi cab drivers. We're going to create new drivers. Airbnb said we're going to create landlords. We're doing something different. From day one, we said we're not going to create demand, we're going to create supply. I'm going to understand the regulatory framework in each of the states and countries now that I work in, and then I'm going to form relationships. Now, it's really easy, right? I ratified hate conventions. You know, I worked for Hillary Clinton. I understand that world. So it was easy. Even though it's not sexy, it was easy for me. I've been in DC for almost 14 years. So these are relationships I already had. But even if you're not close to your federal or local government or don't have those relationships, it is critical to form them early on, or at least understand them. And I think at least being a founder or having someone in your team understand government affairs will be the make or break from having to pivot from a really good business idea. And I've talked to lots of founders about regulatory affairs that have had awesome ideas, have hit hockey stick of growth, have awesome products, and when they go to market, they realize that the regulatory framework is their first death threat. And all of a sudden, they need certain licensures, or they don't understand the industry they're getting in, and that what they're doing is kind of illegal. And we can no longer ask forgiveness. We have to ask permission first, and not forgiveness. And it can be sexy. I think forming relationships, we want to expand in Canada. We see that there's a huge demand for us here. And we have lots of PIs here, but they're only doing research and forensic work because I don't fully understand the regulatory framework. So last month, I met with someone in the Quebec government who's in New York City. It was an easy train ride for me to have a face-to-face breakfast meeting and just start to understand who I need to get to know. That takes very little time and money, but the return on investment of that is so worth it as you scale. It also is something, seeing compliance letters, when you eventually get acquired or go for your IPO, et cetera, that's a death threat. You know, when a potential acquisition, they look and they say, well, how are you handling this regulation here? Knowing that you have compliance letters from the states or whomever the governing body is in the industry that you're in saying, yeah, you're good to go, you're doing everything by the book, just adds to your value as an organization. So what are the death threats to your idea? For us, we said, why has no one done this, right? Like, I don't understand how we've hit this crazy gold mine, and why has no one ever aggregated these PIs before? That even massive insurance companies actually go to Craigslist or talk to a PI that they have in-house to intro them to someone. So if they've got a case in Omaha and they don't know a PI there, they're literally going to the yellow pages, just like you may be. And I just found that fascinating. So for me, it was someone's either had to have done it before, or they did it and they failed, and why did they fail? And that was my first year. That kept me up at night. And that's what you need to think about. Who has done this before? Why did they die? Why were they successful? And if they are successful, how are you doing it differently, right? And maybe you're in a saturated market, want to go in one, but you know you can do it better. Be really clear, not just of what made them successful, but find out about every single person who failed and why. For us, it was the regulatory framework. No one wanted to touch it because it's not sexy and it's kind of messy to go through. And 2 PIs are an interesting bunch. They met, you know, they're meeting me and they're like, you know nothing about my industry that I've been doing for 45 years, and a little girl, like, you're not going to put some cool tech app on what I'm doing. You don't get me. And what I did was I formed relationships, me and my co-founder. There's no association, which I found fascinating. There's no lobby. They just don't want to be aggregated. They don't want anyone to tell them how to do their job well. But they have a trade magazine. And so I went to the trade magazine, and this is in every industry. I highly recommend doing this. Find what they're reading, right? Maybe it's your consumer, what your consumer's reading, or maybe if it's a two-sided marketplace, what are they involved in? And so getting the trade magazine to do an expose on us, basically an article on us, he gave no promises, the head of this magazine. He said, it may be awful, and I may put you out of business, but that was the risk. That was a huge risk I took, but I believed in what we were doing. So, right, that's lucky that he wrote an awesome article. But I knew that I had already thought of the various points, the salient points that he would try to dig in on, or various PIs would say, you don't get this, and I already had answers to it. Co-founder dynamics, everyone's favorite. I feel really strongly about this. So my first startup, which is still running today and profitable, I just don't do the everyday operations. I founded with my father and my brother. Actually, I did all of it. I brought them on afterwards. And it's still incredibly successful and profitable. My second startup, again, was profitable, bootstrapped. I did it with a co-founder who I met actually through a mom's group. She went to the same undergrad institution, Bucknell University, go Bison. And she was an incredible designer. And so she had this idea that we could create children's clothing done in fair trade markets with women's cooperatives, right? So something I care a great deal about. And we would do it for less money. And it was incredible. I mean, we literally hit scale like month 2. But here's the problem. She brought me on for the business acumen and what I could do, but I could not fill the void of what she didn't have. I think sometimes we think as co-founders, like, oh, you have the tech side of the house, you have the tech chops, I've got the business chops, we're going to be just fine, we're going to play well to our strengths and weaknesses. But what happens when that weakness is so weak, it just drags you down like a cement block to the bottom of the ocean? And that's what happened. It was that she just thought money was monopoly money and the ideas we had. And then unfortunately, which I also didn't know, is that she was going through a terrible divorce that I had no idea. And because of that, she was penniless and was dealing with credit issues. And so I had to walk away from that. And it was a really unfortunate situation. And just things that I just never thought of at the time came to light. And so we'll go with the silent movie. These are real silent movie quotes. So you open my doors at your own peril, my ghosts are in there. And so here we are. My co-founder is my husband. It comes up often when I'm pitching VCs or just in general, like, how does that work? And it's awesome because I trust him more than anyone. And I think that any co-founder dynamic, you have to trust them like you do your partner in life or your very best friend or your parent. That is the level of trust. It's also the level of like skeletons in the closet you need to know. And you may think like, I don't need to share this, or like, oh, I don't know how I feel about it. You need to know the good, the bad, the ugly. Danny and I had been friends for 10 years. I saw the good, the bad, the ugly. We mentored each other through our startups. We would oftentimes go places and people would start to tell a story and then stop. And I'd be like, nope, I've heard it all. And I think knowing his weaknesses, his lowest weaknesses, have helped. We also have a clear delineation, which I think is critical. If I have any point of advice from all of this, is that as co-founders, know exactly what you're responsible and have the buck stop with you. So for my team early on, our first employees looked at us as a monolith, right? Like, well, if Danny said that, that's how Jen feels too. Or Danny disagreed with this, so Jen must as well. And that's not the case, right? So I have front of the house, sales, marketing, brand, PR, regulatory affairs, building out the PI network and the association benefits associated with it, et cetera. Danny is all tech, building product, growth, and dealing with our investors and finances. So if I disagree with him on any of those things, the buck stops with him. And I can give my input, but the buck at the end of the day stops there. And the same is with me. And having that clear delineation of responsibilities and where we trust each other, it helps. So Act 3, we're moving along here. Is this going to be easy or hard? Like, for reals though, is this going to be easy or hard? And it's going to be really hard. It's going to be really, really, really hard. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. I have a crazy life. I've got 5 kids. I sit on all these nonprofit boards. The hardest thing I will ever do in my life is build out Trustify. And it's hard in all of the ways I had no idea when I was sitting where you're sitting in 2014. And the hardest part for us, I believe, is around my team. I have the best team in the world, but it's taken some big pain points to get there. And so we'll do a Donald Trump film noir. So hire slow and fire fast. We had this really interesting conundrum. Trustify month 4 got on the books from Ashley Madison. So we were the first to scrape the data that got dumped by the hackers and create a tool. Lots of people created the tool. We were the first. So CNN, Fox, we were on every news outlet you can imagine. And in month 4, we were making $600,000 in 3 days. It was insane. I had like 4 employees, not even. There were like 3 of us at the time. I was on my maternity leave. We had just had our 5th kid. And I needed bodies. I need butts and seats. And there were people during that time that I said, you know what, you were in the trenches with us. I trust you. I knew them kind of personally, and I brought them on board. And first off, I didn't eat my own cooking. We work with the best and the biggest firms in the world on doing a deep dive in terms of HR checks. Background checks are broken. That's a whole different talk. And I didn't even do that on these people, right? It was like, I trusted you. We just worked together for a week. We're good. We're just moving so fast. I need help. And because of that, I have dealt with things that you can't even begin to imagine. I had a 22-year-old employee file a National Labor Relations Board that we let her go for trying to form a union, right? We let her go because she was doing drugs in the bathroom. I mean, it was things like that and just shocking things that I just never thought we'd be dealing with. So being able to find a team that you trust is critical. We had an investor early on sit down with us and say, how many people have you fired? And I had all my companies were bootstrapped, so I never had that kind of conversation. And Danny looked at me and he gave the answer about 12%, and he was like, yep, right on track. And I was like, I was afraid to even share. I mean, transparency is at the core of our business and who we are, but he was looking for that because we want to hire slow, but let them go. You're not doing them any favors because guess what? They don't belong in your company. You're holding them back from something better they can be doing, something they're made to do, which is obviously not at your organization. And who are you taking money from and when? This is my favorite. So I've shared, we've taken $15 million. We have said no to so many term sheets, some name brand, incredible companies, some that wanted us out in the Valley. And I said, no, I am in DC and it works for my brand. I'm changing the brand of this industry. A lot of my folks are former FBI and three-letter agency folks. I get to meet every attorney general that comes into town. I'm not moving. That's just, I don't believe in that. I also said no to some that I knew that our incentives didn't align. So we have taken this kind of puzzle that we've made that kind of makes no sense. I think if people looked at our cap table, they'd be like, this is the craziest cap table I've ever seen. But it was so intentional. And it took a hell of a lot of work. It was almost Danny's full-time job and kind of left me alone to run operations. But if you have the ability to be intentional about when you take money and from whom, it will be one of the greatest things you can do for your startup. So why are we doing this? I think some days it's, why are we doing this? What a fool I've been, what a fool. In the trial of sorrows, right? So we have these highs. I just shared, we raised $15 million in our first year. In our first 15 months, we did $8 million. We did everything, the dream. We have a team right now of 45 individuals that are the best team I've ever had. But there are some really, really hard days. We were at a time where we were like, we are not going to be able to make payroll next month early on. And literally, we were empty out our kids' college savings. Sam up here earlier talked about his incredible acquisition and living in friends' closets and making 10 grand a year. I don't have that luxury, right? I've got 5 kids, but it also makes me most successful because I can't fail. I cannot fail. So I have to believe in Trustify so much if I'm going to empty my children's college savings to pay my employees next month. That's how much I believe in this organization, and it's also why we are successful. And so those days that are really hard and you hit rock bottom, just know they're not going to last forever, right? You're going to be at the top of the roller coaster again, and you'll be right down. And that's why Startup Fest and times like this, it's really helpful to be together. I don't have enough time for meetups. I rarely go to conferences. I say no to a lot of speaking engagements, but I love Startup Fest. And I find places that you value, and you're going to be with other individuals that will have been where you are or have been where you want to be. And it will help you during those days. Avoid ego-driven pitfalls. This is number one, I think, the hardest thing. I think as founders, we equate getting our name in the press and getting awards with success. I think if we're asked to talk at a meetup or our name is on, the local, for me, it's the DC tech scene. I think most DC, we've raised more money than many in tech and in DC, and most don't even know. And it's because we stay away from all of that. It's just not important. If it doesn't lead to your revenue being driven up, finding your favorite investor, or recruiting the best talent out there, it is not worth your time. Just stay heads down and know that if that's important to you, that's something that you have to wrestle with and meditate and talk to someone and find a mentor, because it's not going to lead to anything good. I can promise you that. And part of that is PR can wait. So we've never announced our fundraising. I don't think I've ever talked about it out loud. It's in SEC filings, so you guys can find it, and we have lots of press that track it. But we don't have a PR person in-house. We don't have a PR person on retainer. We don't do PR. We say no to almost all of it, unless It has to do with my brand. And so I'm coming into an industry where, as I shared, most cocktail parties, people are like, Jen, how the hell and why are you doing this? But I'm changing the brand of this industry. It was traditionally a 1%er white male. That is who used PI services. And I have democratized this space that 50% of my consumers are women. My team is a part of that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But unless it has to do with my pro bono work and the organizations I'm partnering with that, or changing the brand of this industry, or about my team, I just say no. I say no to all of it. So we're skipping ahead a few acts because that's how it happens, right? There's a lot now. You're just kind of going through that roller coaster over and over again. So Act 7, so funny, so sad, and I think that's like every day. How are we doing this? Okay, so you have lessons learned. Now you're like, all right, how do I do this? How do I figure out how this all works? And I think that this is the most cliche. It's probably one of those quotes we can all know by heart, but it is at the core of who we are as a company, and it has been at the core of our scale and success. Be the change you want to see in the world. Many of us have read the New York Times article in terms of women founders in tech. I just saw one in The Guardian on the plane on the way here that was, mothers are persona non grata at startups, and it's true. So how we can all talk about those articles and say, oh, that's awful. Oh, it shouldn't be the case. It's such a shame. But then you look at your own startup and you're like, what am I doing to change the ratio? And so we just had $1 million build out we didn't have to pay for in Virginia, which was lovely. And we built 2 nursing mothers' rooms. I don't have a pong table. I've got a gorgeous library that my team has book club nights there. And I attract a different type of employee. I have the best team in the world because they come for different reasons. And I model that and I make that clear in our culture. And it's something I'm really proud of. And this is my team. So we're 70% female. I've got 45 employees, so you can do the math. And again, this is not like a flower delivery company, nothing wrong with that, where women may gravitate towards. This is a private investigator industry. And over 50% come from some protected minority class, whether it's LGBTQ, race, religious minorities, disabled, etc., and they all self-disclose. We do that early on. Do that at a seed stage level and have them give you feedback on how to hire better. And this is part of my success, this. We look like our consumer. When you're democratizing a space and trying to bring it to the masses and trying to reach scale, you have to be disruptive. This is how you're disruptive. You look like your consumer. I don't understand many of the various use cases we get or my ideal customer persona in various verticals. I don't. But there are people on my team who do, who have walked through that, and they have a really cool idea around content, etc. And that is why we have 80% of our consumers and businesses have never used PI before, and they come to us. And doing good is good for business. When Danny and I said we were sitting here, we said we're going to create a company that has to have a social mission component. And Danny and I wrestled with that because he was like, yeah, at some point we'll have a cool foundational arm, but Jen, we have to scale first. And I just thought that we could do it in day one, like they weren't mutually exclusive. And we did. We saw day one that we had individuals coming to us who could not afford our services, but were dealing with incredibly sensitive cases, whether it's domestic violence cases, people who are missing their children. Law enforcement said you have to wait 24 hours. It might be a runaway. And they said, I don't have 24 hours. We saw that the small percentage we do on infidelity, which it happens, and we work in that space, some of that was actually, we would find that the individual was frequenting a prostitute and it was a trafficking ring. And because, we're going to circle back, the relationships I formed with attorney generals, being able to work in their states, that when I got that information, I was able to go back to them, and then hence they trusted Trustify more, and all of a sudden word gets out. And these organizations promote us and what we're doing. And my team, I attract the best talent because they want to be a part of this. They don't want beer pong. They can go play with their friends after work and do that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And we have awesome time as a team. But they really care about making a difference. And you think about this industry, none of you walked in today probably thinking that I was changing the world through PIs on demand, right? It feels skeezy. But by doing this, I change what I'm doing, and it attracts more PIs, it attracts different investors, and it attracts different talent. We raised our Series A fund, one investor who said, I will, afterwards, after they had already said, send us a term sheet, said, the reason why we did this, everything, you guys have the metrics, you have the vision, we like you as people, but at the end of the day, what set you apart is that you were not afraid to put in your Series A investor deck the good that you were doing, the diversity of your team. Don't be afraid. Early on, we thought, investors might think we're not laser focused, but you'll attract the right investors, the people who will be aligned and want to scale and do awesome things with you. And at the end of the day, that's who you want to be in bed with, right? People who have the same vision as you. And so you can have it all. And I hate when they say you can have it all, but not at the same time. Like, I've got 5 kids. I'm an incredibly active mom with them. But I model for my team, right? I've got all of these women and all of these parents, because it's not just women, parents. I leave to have dinner with my kids every single night, and I don't go back on until 7 p.m. I work all night. My husband and I are dueling computers. But my team know for 3 hours, I will not take a meeting. I will not answer their call. And it models it for them. So then they know they have permission to go home and to go on a date and to go out with friends or maybe take their mom out to dinner. And they plant deep roots, right? They realize that through any stage of their life, they can be with my company and they will stay. They've been in the trenches with me, and it's because I value who they are as people, not just employees. But here's the thing. You have to take that first jump. You can have it all, but there's never the best time. There's never a time. I mean, I literally formed this company with 4 kids. We were blending a family, and it was on our honeymoon that we said, let's pull the trigger on this. We launched 2 months later. I had our son within that first year, was on a maternity leave through Ashley Madison. There's never a right time. I was emptying college funds. There's never security. And it doesn't matter. You may be single. You may have, a trust fund that we would all envy. But you're still going to have things that you're like, not now, maybe tomorrow. And that's up to you to take that risk. And you know what? We all come to a point where it's great. And we're like, can't I just stay a little longer? I'm so happy here. And maybe where you're at right now, you're like, just a little longer. I'm not going to take this risk yet. But when I hit this, maybe I will. Maybe I'll feel better to actually launch this business. And I say you got to just roll the dice. You have to roll the dice. You have to know luck is made. And that if you have all of these things behind you and you keep them in your back pocket, you're going to be successful. And you'll live happily ever after. And the end is definitely with a question mark, because it's never the end, right? There's always something else or more we can be doing. But I'm really grateful to be able to share some of my experiences with you all, and would love, we've got some time, we've got like 12 minutes, we can open it up for some Q&A if anyone has any questions. Thanks. Thank you, guys. This was great.